I went from periods 2 through 7, basically without a break except for lunch, and it felt pretty passive, like a lot of sitting. There wasn't a lot of getting up and doing much. Um, it was long. It felt like a really long day. Again, the time, watching the time, and not just me watching the time, but being surrounded by people that were watching the time and asking what time it was and looking up at the clock an awful lot. Um, it felt like it was easy. Like it felt like it doesn't take much to do well at this school that presumably has very high expectations. There's a lot of opportunity to not do very much in class and then to do whatever it is you need to do at home and still do very well. There not once throughout the day was there a situation where by the end of this period you need to have done this and I'm going to check it, which I'm trying not to make any value judgments, but generally the kids were either working on ongoing projects and the teacher would talk to them for a few minutes and then they would get back into whatever they were doing, and they would either choose to work on it or not choose to work on it, or it was explaining instructions of something that was about to come. I know in science they're about to start an exhibition, so the period was devoted to explaining that exhibition. But in not one period were the kids given something to do and told by the end of this period you need to have this done. So it felt really loose and passive and just kind of easy and not very rigorous. Just speaking to the person that I was shadowing, school, and again these are standard classes, is a very easy place, and you just have to sort of keep on top of things when you get home, but you don't really have to do much while you're here except be there. And then that was that. I guess at the end, I think it's really hard at the end of the day. I mean, I found myself thinking how absurd it was to, go from class to class to class, and then all of a sudden, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm sitting in algebra. Everybody's exhausted. I'm exhausted. And it could have been any period, but the end of the day is just a crazy time. I mean, it made me realize that the kids that I have at the end of the day are not with me. They are not there. They are completely not there. And whether or not you need to just go half days, but I'm starting to think that those kids that I have in 5th period, I'm glad that I have them in 5th period because I got the last juice out of them, because from 1:30 to 3 o'clock it's the downhill. You're in the final stretch, and the going home is the important thing.
Yeah.
So that's what.
You should go because you're leaving soon.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I find, like, you're saying your afternoons are bad. I find my mornings are bad. Do you feel like the morning, that kids are with it in the morning?
The morning was more of a not having gotten warmed up yet, but there was still this potential, and then kids started sort of waking up at different moments. The end of the day really felt like not many people were on at the end of the day after having gone through a whole day of 5 or 6 or 7 different classes. It just felt like people's minds were pretty much on getting out of there.
Plus, you didn't have a first period class.
I didn't have a first period class. A break in the middle of everything changed. Every circumstance changes everything. So, having a 5th period free might have rejuvenated me for period 6 and 7, but each kid is coming to us in such a different. Some kids are going to 7 periods throughout the entire day, and that is a lot of different information. Each period went relatively fast. 15 minutes is really not a long time. It's the starting, the ending, and then the starting again. As you go from class to class.
Look, do you mind if we go to Kathy? She used to go teach 6th grade, which is in 10 minutes.
Oh, she got hers?
Yeah. Well, my overriding impression was what Eve finished with, just the sense that no particular period was very long, and I thought that I would be doing more of that, looking at the clock when it was going to be over, but there seemed to be a routine where you came in, the teacher gave you some instructions, and you figured out what was going on, and most kids are kind of listening and not really, and then you get started on whatever it was you were doing, and everybody would ask each other what was really going on, because maybe they hadn't paid that attention that much, and then you do it, and then it would be over, and it would be time to go. And I just felt, although the day was long, every period was short, and it was just boom, 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 boom. And I was telling a friend today that I went to 2 movies in a row one time. I went from one and then I snuck into the other when it was done, when the first was done. And I found that I couldn't think about one of the movies. Usually I reflect on movies that I've seen afterwards, but 2 movies was just too much to reflect on, and I just kind of blocked one out of my memory. And with those classes, 6 classes, you can't concentrate on all of them. You can't think about them. You can't go home and let this stuff percolate through because you've just got way too much stuff. It's just boom, 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 go. There's a bell, another one to go to. There's a bell, another pick up, clean up, set up. That was my overriding opinion again, again, again.
What was the grade level that you?
Oh, junior. Although she took some sophomore classes because she had not passed some classes last year, and I think that, or whatever. And
Were they mostly standard?
they're all standard classes. And it wasn't, the classes weren't especially passive. And in some ways, I personally enjoyed the passive ones, like English class first period, just kind of strolled in there, and we read a play and talked about it. I really liked that as compared to for a teacher, having to come in and have everything ready to go. It was just a really nice way to kind of ease into the day. But I don't know if I were to do the whole day of being passive again and again and again, if it would start to feel tiring. But I didn't mind the listening so much. But I just thought that there's no way that all six of her periods could be meaningful to her, because she's just going to go home and forget some of them and won't be able to reflect
Did you
on them.
find, like Eve meant, the first thing you mentioned was sitting and listening, the passive part? So did you, some classes,
Some
You found
classes
it
were
first-
up and moving around and doing stuff. There was games in the Spanish class. There was an exhibition going on in the science class. Reading a play in the English class, which for some people is going to be passive, but others not. But my dominant impression was not one of passivity.
Mhm.
But I think, again, that might change if I was doing day after day after day after day. For a teacher, it was kind of relaxing in a way for me to just sit there. But they were doing different stuff. They were getting up and moving around in those classrooms.
One of my impressions of the student body at large is that a large number of kids are just kind of hanging out here, doing as little as possible to not get hassled by their parents or the teachers. Did either of you find any evidence to support that
Definitely.
model? Or?
For my student, who's somebody who I was introduced to as somebody who could do better than she is, she's certainly smart enough to be doing it, but isn't pushing herself. That was definitely true. Just kind of, what do we have to do to pass this? What do I have to know? No true engagement, and in the sense of this is something that's meaningful to me. And I even asked a couple times, what are you doing? What's the purpose of this simulation? I don't know. I don't know why we're doing it. Doesn't really seem to have much to do with chemistry, but it's kind of fun. I couldn't really get much sense of why they were, from her, why they were doing the things they were doing.
I followed a freshman girl. She has 2 intensive classes, and the rest of her classes were standard. The intensive classes were science, biology, and then English. And I found, it was from activity to activity to activity to activity to activity. I felt like I could have been in 4th grade. Okay, everyone, put your books away. We're going to do this now. Put your books away. We're going to do that now. That's what classes seem to be like for me. She did maths. She loved doing the math. I was really watching her for moments of engagement. Where is this girl lighting up? Where is she showing real interest? I was really trying to watch. I was trying to sit sort of across from her a little bit. And she took quizzes. She took a test. She participated in discussion. Took notes on a discussion. She participated in a game in her language class. She worked on a project. In all of it, she's the kind of girl who's a really good girl, like our classic good student who's conscientious and does what she needs to do and is very organized. She's got that beautiful notebook with everything laid out. She 3-hole punches everything. One of those kids, And it was, she just teacher would tell her what to do, and she'd sit down and she'd start doing it. She would get it done, and then she'd sit back and wait for the next moment. And then the bell would ring, and then she'd pack up her stuff, and then she'd go. And then she'd be off to her next activity. It really, the structure of the day kind of really hit me right immediately after first period. It was a history class, and the teacher read this story aloud, and the story was extremely engaging, a story that demanded a conversation after it, a story that really kept, I mean, everyone in the room was on the edge of their seat listening to this story. It was incredible. And then the bell rang. Like, he was like mid-sentence, oh, that's the bell, see y'all tomorrow. Bell rang, and everyone, not even discussing or not even a chance to think about it for a second. Quick, go to your locker, get your stuff, boom, go to Spanish class. And obviously there's nothing in Spanish class relating to the Black Plague or anything, which is what the story was all about, all these people dying and everything. And suddenly it was as if the whole first period never even existed, in my mind even. I didn't even have a chance for myself as a history teacher to reflect back on that. And then we did Spanish. And then the bell rang again, went downstairs and we did English. And none of it connected to each other. She had it very organized. 6 periods, she sat by herself during her free period, and she did whatever homework she had to do, which very little. She had 10 Spanish questions to do, a little worksheet. And the only other homework she had to do was, she had an English test the next day, so she was looking over her notes for that. She sat by herself, did it quietly, went to her locker again, went to the bathroom. That was her free period, and then went to her math class and took a test there. It was, again, activity to activity to activity, and no reflection at all. And none of it put together, none of it connected to each other during the day either. None of it. It struck, I felt like a rat, kind of, in an experiment, in a maze, and at each part of the maze I had to like do something, for a trick, and then I'd do the trick, and then the bell would ring, and I'd have to go and do another trick, and then the bell would ring again, quick, do the next thing, and then, 2:50, you'd go home. It was that kind of feeling for me. It also struck me as a teacher who has, I was telling Kathy this earlier, I have my 2 free periods. And one of my free periods is truly mine because no one else is in my office because my office mates are not in there at that time period. And I really have an hour to myself. She has an hour to herself too, but it's at the end of the day. By the time 6th period, that free period came around, I was uptight. I needed quiet time to sit down. It was very hectic, a lot of running around, no time to make a phone call, no time to check email, no time to do those quiet things that I like to do during my day, and she was just boom, 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 pushed on to the next thing, don't be late. That was, I guess, what got me about it. Not a lot of, she did what she was told to do, and she did it really well. One of her teachers said, if all my students were as organized as her, it'd be great. And I thought, but she's not into it.
Well, is this student engaged or not? What are you saying about her?
I'm saying that she's doing what she's supposed to do. Is it a high level of engagement? I don't know. She's getting all A's and B's. B's and A's. She's like, I think 3 A's and 3 B's kind of thing.
I would say the same thing about my student that I
But
followed.
I didn't see any real thought going on.
No.
Perhaps there was
Didn't
some
care.
stuff. Even the exhibition that she was, or I don't know if it was an exhibition, the project she was doing for her biology class was, it was just like, get the poster board, let's draw a little chart. It wasn't even a thoughtful one, the project she was doing.
In all 3 of you guys' classes, not just talking about your student, but anyone else, did you see any, real sparks of engagement?
Engagement or concern and care and thought for the subject matter at hand?
Interest?
I saw a little.
Interest versus, or engagement.
At the mining, the science class, they were getting, they were having their orientation for the mining exhibition that they were gonna start the next day, and they found out that they were gonna be competing with other groups. And they had to be really careful about buying and selling, and for a half a second, the student that I was with said that he thought that was cool, but no, not really.
I did.
Again, what I found that it was pretty easy to do what you have to do, and to do pretty well by doing what you have to do, but nothing exciting really.
Real quick, I saw real interest amongst the classes I saw in 2 classes, ropes. The ropes class, they were in a group, they were trying to climb this ladder, there were 2 people on the ladder, everybody else was sort of somehow involved with it, people were really there, people were really interested, people were yelling out advice. There was a lot of interest in the ropes class. There was also a lot of interest in the English class. There was a discussion going on that the teacher was completely out. and just letting them run their own discussion. And it was a lot of arguing and yelling at each other and interest, and people were like, no, you're wrong. And so that, I thought that was really
Was that
good.
intensive?
That was an intensive class.
I had a couple of moments when one student, I think, had sparks, but to continue the analogy, that was not the time when the kindling was there to catch. A question was asked, and I think she was interested in her answer that she wrote down, and then the teacher called on somebody else for the discussion, and then at that point the student wasn't really interested. But I think that she was truly engaged when she was writing her response to the question, but then there was nothing to follow up on that.
Kathy, was there much affect in the student? Were they flat or? did
She's
they
pretty
appear-
flat, and I think she is pretty flat about school in general. For whatever reasons, I think she's got a lot of other stuff going on. But yeah, flat would be an adjective I would use.
And you, Amy, you feel the same way?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, even though kids were engaged in these classes, my student wasn't particularly engaged. She was just kind of going through the motions, and she was doing fine, but it was kind of flat. It was definitely flat. She smiled, and she was sort of, looking around, interested and stuff. But but that's maybe that's her personality.
Did these days for you two, did it seem like what you would think would be typical days, teaching-wise? Like, do you think that they were typical lesson plans that you saw?
Yeah, I even got to see a sub. And how the kids dealt with the
it
sub.
felt pretty
And,
What-
yeah.
I believe Eden said something about one of the teachers was winging it.
No, I don't.
Someone mentioned winging the teacher.
That,
Teacher
yeah,
felt like she was winging.
Teacher felt like she was winging it. Did you,
that was Kathy saw that
was
class.
that Kathy? Was
Mhm.
there, how did you feel about the teaching aspect that you saw? In other words, not put any individual teachers on the spot, but was it, I know I wing it sometimes, and I was wondering, did
Yeah.
you feel like some of them were winging it sometimes?
I don't know, but I think winging
Thoroughly,
is.
thoroughly professional, and that's the best.
It
So
seemed
forth.
planned. I mean, all the teachers that I watched definitely knew what they were doing. They were not winging it. They knew what they were doing. They probably had it written down, or they definitely knew what they were doing when they walked into the classroom and carried it through to the end. There wasn't a lot of variable, there wasn't a lot of room for alternative, accidental things happening that weren't planned. So in other words, the teacher had this idea of what was going to happen, and what did happen probably matched 99% to what the teacher thought was going to happen. There were no questions from left field. There was not a lot of inspiration for questions from left field. There wasn't a lot of discussion that the teacher never thought would happen. It was pretty calculated, and that's what happened.
Just task maintenance, everyday stuff.
It really
Task
was.
maintenance, but yeah, nothing happened that the teacher did not expect to happen.
Right. I would agree with that. I would say everything was pretty planned out, and again, this only exacerbates the whole passivity of the whole day. I mean, literally, you just go, and it was like Skinner, B.F. Skinner or something, and everything's set up, and the kid goes through the motion that the teacher has planned out, and then the bell rings.
Did you get a sense, though, that things were contrived for the sake of the teacher's convenience and perhaps the teacher's professional evaluation? Was there any sense that things were in that mode, or were they organized to suit the students and how things had to be set up and managed, or to suit the schedule?
I think it was, if what you're talking about is the Madeline Hunter stuff as far as, I didn't really see a lot of that. I saw, let's see, I saw one class, it was like a project, an ongoing project, so they sort of came in, they knew what they were doing, they continued along. And then, no, I felt like each teacher was doing what came naturally to them to cover whatever it was that was to be covered at that point. And of course taking the schedule into account, because nobody started anything that was going to take too long that couldn't end when the bell rang. Nothing was, except for the one in the language class, the project that they were working on, it was a beginning, middle, end period. Nothing was started that was going to be finished the next day.
Well, think about this though. Think if these kids have been in school for 10 years or whatever they've been in school, And they've got 10 years of however many days of experience of going in and having these delivered activities for them. Just like you were describing, in one day they have this, years of this. And you just have to think, as I'm talking to you guys in the camera, and you just have to think that, like, what a different place it would be if they came to class and it was a totally unknown, and it was unknown, and what developed in the class was based on what they did.
Right.
How different it would be in terms of passive versus active. I mean, I don't know how to set that up. I don't know how to create that, but I mean, that's a lot of training that's gone into these students going from class to class and having these neat packages given to them by teachers.
They've been low.
Yeah, and they're not critical of it at all. I mean,
They probably don't know. They don't even know that anything else
They
exists.
have no
Fine.
concept. They're
They're fine
fine.
with
They
it.
do it. They get a little tired. They look at the clock, but
They're fine.
they don't complain about the piece, the way that they go through the day. That's the most natural thing for them. They've been doing it since they were 5 years old.
I have another question though. I mean, all three of you described students who went through the motions at varying levels. I'd like to hear if you had any observations of kids that aren't willing to play the game, that dig their heels in and refuse to do what the teacher has asked them to do, or are pretending to. Because, in my own classes, I've got a sprinkling of them here and there that, here is the work that's ongoing, or here is the task, and they just don't do it. Or
Yeah.
they say, I'll do it later, and they still don't do it.
In
So-
the math class that I saw, it was 7th period, it was Algebra 1, and, which was this classic 9th grade class. And she came in, it was a test, she came in, she turned in her homework, she sat down, she waited for the test came to her, and she was down like this. That was her. Half the room, though, they were just messing around, making noise. I mean, there was one kid who had been taking the test 6th period, and he was still in their 7th period, and he was just out of control. Honestly, he didn't care about this test. It was a meaningless test to him, or it was hopeless for him, maybe that was it. Maybe the hope, maybe the sense of, I can't do it anyway, made it a meaningless test for him. But there were a number of kids who weren't doing anything. One kid sat down and he didn't have his homework to turn in, and he just sat there. Everyone else around was taking the test. And I leaned over and I said, "Are you taking the test?" And he went, this one like this. And then about 5 minutes later, the teacher comes over and whispers something to him, and then he gets up and gets the review sheet and sits down and starts doing math problems. That's a really bizarre thing. But there were a lot of kids who were not necessarily that into it. I mean, even in the ropes class, there was a kid sitting on the mountains kind of hanging out, waiting for class to be over. She was dressed out and everything, but wasn't involved with what was going on. And even in this discussion in the intensive English class, they had this big test the next day. A lot of kids just sat there and didn't do anything.
They were mentally
Next
checked
meeting,
out.
doodling all over the place. Yeah. I thought, you have a test tomorrow.
Do you think the package would change in a 79-minute class, or do you think it just becomes a larger package?
I think it would change, because you would have less, I do think it would change because you would have less in one day. So you would only be dealing with, say, your 4 classes in that one day, and there would be more room, if it was used correctly again, to do more different things.
Because I'm thinking, you're saying a lot of the stuff they do at home. Well, is it just going to change that instead of doing it at home, you now have time in class to do it?
Well, I don't know.
I thought, especially, like Eve started off saying it sounded like there was a lot of passive time. But then what Kathy and Amy described was actually not necessarily passivity in terms of the time, like just sitting there listening and sort of.
It was active.
Right. But the problem was then the schedule and the way it was, as you said, or Kathy described, start, work, stop. Next round, start, work, stop. And then you said, it was like the kids were pushed on, don't be late. And that sort of summed up the schedule thing. And so listening to what you said, it sounds like the biggest thing that you hit on was reflection and just slowing down the pace and taking time for reflection so that these activities that they're doing, if they are active in class, have more meaning, more relevance, and that they're thinking about them.
That was big for Kathy too. That was huge for her.
Yeah, for example, even in the history class alone, there were, I think, probably 4, where is my history class notes? There was maybe 4 different activities alone in the history class. maybe even 5. There was even a little, like a 2-minute video clip. It was boom, 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 boom. All these things happening in the history class. And it was kind of like, you did it, and then you moved on, and you didn't move on, and there wasn't reflection. I mean, there wasn't time to like go, okay, we just did all this stuff, what does it all mean?
Right.
Let's digest it. That time didn't exist, and for all I know, the teacher did that the next day. Maybe he came back and then he spent time reflecting on what had happened, and then maybe who knows what happened the next period. I don't know.
Sounds like television.
Television.
MTV.
But as Kathy said, you know, if she sees 2 movies, it's hard to remember 1. If you go to 6 classes, it's hard to remember 3, let alone 6. But if you have, I mean, it'd be interesting to interview kids at schools that have gone to A to B day who are only having 3, sometimes 4 classes in a day. More time for reflection, possibly.
It sounds like to me that AB day isn't the option. It's 4 classes a semester. It seems like it would be better
Yeah.
than doing the AB day.
Right. I mean, to take it to the
For
extreme,
kids.
not that I'm advocating this, but when you think about like Colorado College, which has its 4, you take the 1 class for 4 weeks, and then you take it, and for exactly that reason, that you have time to digest and time to think and really grow with that subject before you move on.
But sometimes I think, do you really? Because you're doing so much in such a short period of time, do you really have that time to digest?
Yeah, how much,
That's
how much,
another extreme anyway.
yeah,
It is,
how
right,
many
we would never do
concepts
that,
can
but-
you really master in, if too many are thrown at you, whether they're from different subject areas or within one? I mean, there you get into a different hang-up, especially if it's difficult to understand concept number 3 without knowing 1 and 2 really well.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's that I think that needs to be balanced.
Another thing is just conceptual, what word do I want to use? Conceptual overlay between classes, I guess. I purposely chose a kid who had 6 different classes. I mean, I don't want anyone who has a humanities class, a double block class. It would be really interesting to know how is a kid who has a double block class, a humanities style, or there's no fractions yet, but something like that, where you have 2 classes at once that completely interrelate. How would that be a different day? How would that be a different kind of experience?
Because it's 1/3 of your day.
Right.
I'm struck by the teacher as master puppeteer, you know, getting every second of the entire 54 minutes planned out to the nth degree with every single possible variable taken into account for what could happen, so that it seems like a very controlled sort of lesson. And, you know, what is it that we could do? What, I guess we're kind of getting into implications, but what is the implication then on what we would have to do in order to change that element? Because I'm not so sure that changing the schedule would really make enough of a difference if that 79 or 89 or 90-minute period block still winds up with the teacher just, okay, now I've got to control it for a longer period of time.
A lot of teachers are going to be like that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and
I'm with her, that's.
I mean, that's one of the things that I think we need to look at as one of the implications, because I don't think that it's just a use of time. I think it's also the investment level of the kid. How can a kid be invested in what he or she is learning if the teacher's the one that has laid everything out? And I think that we've kind of had to do that up till this point, and I think it's been because we've been under such a microscope with our community, and now maybe it's time for us to let go on that. And I don't know how to do that yet, but I want to put that thought out there.
Well, I'd like
Yeah.
to advocate a suggestion.
Well,
Yeah.
Because I certainly relate to it in terms of 2 things that have been mentioned so far, in terms of the pace of the day. Our kids who leave at noon, we have 10 come here for 6th and 7th period classes. And right now they're taking math, science, and a couple of writing classes. The change in pace from our 7:30 to noon and task orientation to the pace and the task orientation here is a real turnaround. Our approach is that it's the student's decision what they want to work on, and like you were saying, Carrie, they want to work on one subject, they can do that all morning. They can bury themselves in an algebra packet if they need that work, or it's an English packet and just stay on that subject. They can do that for 3 days in a row and get it out of the way, and then go for a refresher. Some of them have the right, and they'll work on 2 or 3 subjects at once. But the most outstanding thing is that when they come over here, it's all that little automaton behavior that they run right into, and they're going, oh, God.
Have they talked about that?
Yeah.
What do they say?
Well, I'm trying to draw that out of them for exactly this reason. You know, why are they burning out here in the first place? Because they'll approach a class where we as teachers have been trained to maintain this 50-minute period. Okay, we got our bell work, and we have this, and we have this, and we have that, and we do these things. Okay, that's part of the system. But then from the kids' perspective, they come in, and generally we're dealing with some of the brighter kids from the school. They'll come in and they'll do the bell work and they'll do all the assignments in 10 minutes. They're done. Then they have to sit there for another 40 minutes while the teacher goes along at every other pace. So this homogenization of time and activities isn't working. And it seems like rather than just to say we need longer periods or something, maybe it's a matter of choice, you know, like we're trying to do. Now, of course, that means an entire change of curriculum, or I think you were getting closest to it, Jan, is that we change how we're teaching. I don't stand there and teach all the subjects for an hour block every day, but I'm available to them. They come to me and say, I have this history project, I don't understand what I'm doing here, or I've got this in math, and then we guide and we tutor, rather than saying, here, I'm the authority, you're going to do it this way, or here's my lesson today. And that's so much more empowering when they can start to come in and say, I really need help with this, Ms. Carlson. You know, this is what I want to do, not because, you know, you have a finely tuned schedule and you know what it takes to get it done in a semester. But then they're really motivated to get involved, and the affect changes. Then we've got happy, curious, argumentative, you know, no, this is how you do it, you know, and they're all engaged.
It would be
the passivity of, okay, teach me now, I'm ready.
because what you're talking about seems like such a huge change in how our school looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I don't think it shouldn't be done or even should be looked at, but it would be interesting to do it on a small term scale first. So for instance, say, take 2 weeks out of the year and say these 2 weeks we're not going to go through our regular class. These 2 weeks we're going to have a different schedule in which you are paired with your advisor or paired with a teacher of your choice or however you do it, and you're going to do something. You're going to come up with something of your own self-learning. And as a pilot experimental program, and then talk and just to discuss this whole idea of taking on your own learning and passivity, and it would be really interesting to try something like that.
I think we kind of had that. It was called graduation competencies.
Yeah.
And that was kind of dropped.
You know, I'm listening to all of this, and I'm almost, you know, I'm getting out of the student head now, I'm putting on the teacher thing, and it's like, you know what? I have a sub in my class right now, and for that sub to do what the sub's doing, I have this I put a lot of effort into, make sure you only give them this much time for this, and then you have them do this, and then have them do that. And I think about the way I teach. I am absolutely, it's very task-oriented, and in this period they're going to accomplish this. And I even think about the last 4 days, I had stations set up, and they literally taught themselves everything they needed to know. But God, to get that together, to get that organized, to have all that, the preparation up front was unbelievable. I was stressed out for a week beforehand. But boy, they knew exactly, step by step by step, what they had to do to learn what they had to learn in order to be successful in that station. But that's still, even though they were teaching themselves, it was absolutely, completely puppeteered, or whatever you were saying, by me.
That's what I'm.
How can I not teach
Well,
that
that's what I'm
way?
curious about, because we've got two different levels going on, I think. I mean, when there are conversations throughout the year have been on our goal, our focus of student as worker, right? And we've talked about how in our individual classes can we get kids more engaged and kids working. And so our focus was more on how do we get the teacher out of teacher as deliverer of information role and into the coach role.
Right.
So then, last week, we started talking about all the things on, brainstorming that we want our kids to be doing. What behaviors do we want our kids to have in class? We want them to be doing this and doing that and doing that. And finally, we started saying, well, wait a second. No wonder they're doodling. No wonder they're tuning out. No wonder they're writing notes for their friends, because we all have these expectations throughout the day, and we sort of puppeteered them working. And if they're doing this in 6 different classes throughout the day, what is it like from a student's perspective? So now we've taken it to more of a macro level and looking at it school-wide. And now we're talking less about our individual classrooms and more about the structures of the school. And in some ways, our goal of getting kids to be more student as worker, and ourselves, teacher as coach, if everyone across the school is doing that 6 periods a day, with the structure of our school, it's kind of what you guys are pointing out. I mean, you and Kathy actually said that the kids are working.
They're
But
they're
they're
active.
They're active. They're actively, I mean, it's more active learning. We would say it was better than if they'd gone to 6 classes each and just listened to lectures. But it's brought up a whole new.
I mean, maybe we need to go back and redefine what it means, what we think student as workers is supposed to be, because the most interesting class that I went to that whole day was somebody lecturing to me. And it wasn't just for me. I mean, the kids, the level of engagement throughout the class was in a history class, and the history teacher was literally up there talking to us about, you know, the Great Depression and how it was, and this and that. And so, you know, by this definition of student as worker, they were working. Their minds were working. What I think we're talking about is when we orchestrate these tasks that there's just no way that you can fail. I mean, you either do it, if you do it, then you're going to do it because the instructions are crystal clear. And that is student as fulfiller of what we expect them to do. That is not
Jumping through
student
hoops.
as, it's jumping through hoops, and they are working and they might be sweating. That's how hard they're working. But they are not engaged.
Right.
They are
it's
not
not their
excited. They're not
hoops.
masters of any sort of destiny. They are just doing a very good job saying yes ma'am, yes sir, and doing it.
Hey, I left a plan in my class just now, the kids are doing it right now, of, you know, read the reading and answer the question.
Sure.
And, you know, they're gonna do it as on the lowest level of engagement as possible. For some kids, that'll mean you copy Johnny's paper who sits next to you. For other kids, it'll mean you don't really read the reading, you look at the question first and then you go back and see if you can find the answer in the reading. And very few of them will engage it on any kind of meaningful level. Why did I leave that? I left it because I knew the kids they're accustomed to it. It's a task that'll keep them busy enough so that they probably won't give the sub a very hard time. And, you know, yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. I feel kind of guilty, but at the same time, I don't know what else to do, you know?
I think to ask kids to be the master of their own hoops, if you will, it's a whole different mindset for these kids, and you have to train them to be able to to be independent in their
That's
learning.
exactly right.
And these kids, based on what we're saying, they've been in school all their lives and they've never been independent in their learning. To ask them suddenly to walk into a classroom and, you know, regardless of whether a sub is there or not, regardless of whether or not it's the most incredible teacher in the world there, to completely take responsibility for what's going on and to really challenge themselves for the sake of their own minds. And these kids don't know how to do that. And there's no level of trust. We can't ask them to do that unless we have structures that are different. I mean, I guess we can do it, but if I'm doing it in my classroom and they're not doing it in the rest of the day,
Well,
I don't know.
I think a lot of the
Doesn't
problem
it
too.
give them variety though? I think that's what, you know, I know I struggled with when we set up the school to do that. You know, my training was, you know, you do the objectives, you know, you time it out and do all that stuff.
It's all of our training.
But God, it's so much fun when you really do let go, and they come back to you, and they really want to know that, Miss Prosson, you're a great science teacher, we know that. And they come to you, and they take that approach. You know, they'll come to me, you
Because
know,
then
I'm
they'll be
really looking.
receptive to listen to what I have to teach them.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Because
And it's-
they need
and it's
it.
their
Yeah.
It
choice.
becomes a
Exactly.
necessity.
It comes from the
I think that
society.
if you sort of give them what we do is we give them the means and the end. Instead of giving them the end, and then, I mean, we have to give them something. I mean, you know, maybe they can't figure out what's important, but we can maybe ask them the important question, and then they have to figure out how to get there. Instead of, okay, we're gonna answer this question, and we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do this 3 times, and then, it's not that open, and then, so we're training them not to be independent thinkers. I mean, it's not
Why
it's
not
not
the
a
other
neutral
way?
thing.
You're saying we give them the ends, and then they have to figure out the means. Could it be the other way around?
Yeah, it could be the other way.
You know, and I struggle with that all the time when I try and figure what is it that I would want. You know, one of the things that I've been just absolutely fascinated by this year is talking to Vanessa, my daughter, and asking her, what is it that you remember from your day from last week? What are you thinking about in terms of next week? She's 13, and she's going to be one of those kids that comes in with a perfect notebook, okay? I'm not kidding. This is my daughter. I didn't teach her this, by the way. She figured this out herself. But you know, it's really interesting because very recently she was just sweating for this upcoming thing, and I was asking her, what are you so nervous about? She said, we have to teach this lesson. It's the hardest thing we've ever had to do. And they had to teach the difference, she and her partner had to teach the difference in her social studies class between totalitarianism and democracy. And she did not have a clue. I mean, she really didn't. And she said, this is so hard, and she said, and those kids are so uncooperative. It cracked me up, you know, and I'm just sitting there going, you know.
But there is something about kids doing,
Yeah.
rather than just sitting. There is something there is that level, there is that stress that your daughter's feeling, and that stress is the thing that gets us up out of the bed every day. I mean, there's things that we
Wakes us
need.
up at 3 in the morning.
Yeah, whatever it is. I mean, there's good stress and there's bad stress, and there's these things there. There's a teacher here at this school. I asked a kid once, who do you think is the best teacher? Just randomly, I asked him, like, because I wanted to know why. What makes a teacher such a good teacher? And he gave me this teacher's name, and I said, really? That's interesting. I've never seen this person's classroom or anything about it. He said, yeah, and you know what's odd is he doesn't even teach. In fact, he's never taught. He just roams around, the room. We completely have taught ourselves everything we need in that class, and we go to him for questions. He comes by and helps once in a while. And I thought, that's really interesting. But he must spend a lot of time setting up his room to be the way it is, so that kids can access the material that obviously he's got to have a plan up there, don't you think?
Oh, yeah.
He's got a curriculum. He's got something there.
It's like an Easter egg hunt, you know?
But the kids are on it, and they're into it, and he lets them find it on their own.
That's why I was asking about affect. It's the way the kid comes into your classroom. They're either up and they're happy, or they're blown out about what happened in the last class, or what happened at home the day before. That whole attitudinal, and I don't want to go off into, you know, the psychological aspects of their conditioning, but I think the affect every day and how much time we take, and you were saying, you know, how we set up our class. We don't change the entire schedule of the school, but we do start, you know, you're doing it one way, somebody else is doing it another way. We go around the table, we get 9 different ways. The kid gets the variety, and they start making decisions about, yeah, I'm really comfortable in this class, you know. And wow, you know, Mrs. Green's done something in math, but, you know, now it's not a trauma for me. I enjoy that different approach. You know, that they start to make decisions, because what we're asking them to do is figure out, how do you learn?
You know what, Bill, though? All the kids I saw, really, almost all the kids I saw all day, I mean, they weren't thrilled or anything, but everybody was a happy kid. I really saw a whole bunch of pretty happy ninth
That's
graders.
good. I'm really glad to hear that.
Going through, but it was I mean, it was kind of flat, like, okay, we'll do whatever, what's required of us, and here we go doing it.
Well, then that's not real happy.
But they were, like, cheerful about it. They were cheerful kids, and they didn't seem to mind. Nobody was bitter about the experience. Nobody was, I hate school. They were, hey, this is okay, whatever, if you want us to do it, okay,
Because
fine.
it's pretty easy to,
Yeah.
it's pretty easy to follow instructions. It's like making a cake. I mean, you know, you
Cheerful.
just read it. If you can read, you can cook. If you can read, you can do well in school for the most part. Because you just read the very clear instructions that your teacher has spent hours making for you as clear as possible. So, yeah, I mean, it's nice.
And it's kids with no structure in their lives that are often the most unhappy.
Yeah.
Right.
They can respond to structure in the developmental stages. It's easy for them, it's stable, it's, you know.
And I think, I mean, I've talked to students who say, I don't want the long periods, or they get sometimes upset if you have something that doesn't have instructions. I know that, like, Stanford talks about having projects with ambiguity purposefully, so that they can so that's part of it, is trying to figure it out. And I think that's part of, I think, you know, I think when you guys were talking about the whole anxiety and stress, and Vanessa, your daughter, I mean, that comes with it. If you open it up to it, they might not be as
Happy.
cheerfully walking down, because all of a sudden there's an element of unknown and responsibility
Right.
and stretching, and stretching never isn't comfortable.
But on the same note, you know, I've found that the most ambiguous that I've been with instructions, I wound up with the best products at the end, and that the relief, the kids' sense of having done something and their sense of relief and accomplishment goes up. You know, if you follow a set of instructions and everybody's had the same set of instructions and you're successful at it, then, you know, what have you done?
Okay, but devil's advocate to it, because I have kids that say this, like, they didn't really understand something that they did it, and they got this grade, and someone else got that grade, and they weren't happy because their opinion was the teacher had something in mind that they wanted as a product, and mine did not
Right.
get that goal, but my teacher never told me that that's the product they wanted.
Well, you can be very clear with your expectations. You can have generic expectations that would match any product. And then however the kid gets to achieving those expectations should be fine if you're upfront and clear with those expectations. That doesn't mean that you have to tell them exactly what you want. It can be anything as long as it matches.
Meaning that the expectations
If you're
are
gonna
clear,
be-
the kids have to
Yeah,
remember
if you're
ahead of time
ambiguous with the
standards are
projects
clear.
and ambiguous with the
But they can go any
expectations,
direction to do
Sure.
that product.
you give
and
them a
create
crystal
that.
clear rubric of expectations, but then you can be as ambiguous as you want with the assignments.
And what it's supposed to look like.
And then it's up to the kid to be honest with themselves, and if I think that if they've had you all year and they get a sense of what that means, that obviously Miss Green's idea of above and beyond might be different than Miss Brennan's idea of above and beyond, but they know who they're dealing with, they know what your expectations mean, then it's up to them to be honest with themselves when they do what they do. I mean, nothing would be more frustrating than having ambiguous expectations and an ambiguous project, because then, you know. then what
It's
do you-
interesting, I was just, this exact same conversation that you're starting right now, I just had on Monday afternoon, no, yesterday afternoon with my debate students. They came in furious because of a bad experience with a teacher. All of them were furious, every one of them.
They all have the same teacher?
Yeah. And,
This is debate after
this is
school.
after school, yeah. So, they came in and they were ranting and raving, and the guy I coach with, he immediately is like, okay, let's come up with arguments for and against. What do we like, you know, and then he comes up with this resolution. Tests are not good measurements of learning. All right, prove this, disprove it. And they had a whole brainstorm list all over the place. And basically what the kids came up with, I totally sat down and was just watching this. The kids came up with tests. They don't like tests because the tests are not usually good tests. They're not really they're particularly good instruments. What they like and the way they learn, the thing they get anything out of is the projects or the exhibitions because it's really in-depth. And then the student said to me, I will never forget as long as I live this one completely this completely vague assignment I had my students do in my history class. With it's high expectations, but very vague in terms of what they have to do. She totally did it on her own. She goes, I'll never forget it as long as I live. It was in depth. I worked on my own. It was totally outside of class. It was really fun, and I got a lot out of it. And I thought that's really interesting because I didn't even teach that. It's a completely separate assignment.
Independent.
Independent project.
Well, the first year, I remember you guys had this little chart, and it was ambiguity with the planning team people. Talk to us about, remember what that was?
Let's see.
Risk and ambiguity. isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and they
But
were
if it
talking
weighs a
about five.
lot, it's high ambiguity and low risk.
Yeah.
There are four different,
Right.
If it's low ambiguity, low risk, it's basically, you
Then it's
can
just
do
what
it
it
by
is.
just
Yeah.
going
It's
through
worksheet.
the, yeah, do the worksheet. And then if it was one that was bad, if it was
high
high risk.
ambiguity and high
high
risk
risk.
would, I think, superficially be a bad thing because you're causing a lot of stress.
Right,
But I think that as you move, if these are the kinds of things that you're working on all year, then at the end of the year, say a culminating project could be very high ambiguity, and it could be worth 20% of your grade, which is definitely high risk, and that's when the kids are gonna really push themselves.
but if you do high ambiguity, high risk at the wrong time. either
Right, it's a time
developmentally
thing.
Right.
or
It should
at
be
the
high
beginning of the
ambiguity,
year,
low risk, whereas tests are low ambiguity, high risk.
High risk, okay. Right, I just found that really interesting. I remember somebody, Jen
Yeah.
polished me
We
putting that up.
spent time looking
Eve.
at that.
Do you have a master's?
Huh?
Nothing.
So you're referring back to this project that you just had your kids do, which is
was high ambiguity and high risk.
It was relatively
But
high
you're doing
ambiguity.
it in April after they've worked with you for
After
a
I've
year.
been ambiguous with them all year.
Well, I mean, no, I mean,
No,
you wouldn't,
yeah,
you-
I would not have done this
the
the
same way.
first quarter, I would definitely. In fact, the projects that I did earlier in the year were annoyingly low ambiguity. And that's, I mean, remember when I got tuned and I brought that project in? And I was so annoyed about the way that you could just sort of perfunctorily go through this thing, and of course you could, because I'm telling you exactly what I want, there's no way around it, this is exactly what I want. And then I was annoyed at the end when nobody did beyond what I wanted them to do.
Or creatively thought about that.
Of course, and who would? Where's the motivation? You can get an A+ on this project by going down the line and following the instructions.
Just like you and your master's.
Exactly. So I started realizing
No, she
that
says
I
all the
just
time.
needed to start leaving things wide open, and you might have, you run the risk of the few kids that might start slipping through the cracks a little because they need that structure, then you need to really guide them more. But for the most part, these projects that these kids just did were fantastic. I haven't seen them do anything like this all year because I haven't given them the opportunity because everything's been so unambiguous.
Do you mind saying what it is?
Basically, the question was, how do artists go about trying to change society? Because we've been looking at oppression all year, and I sort of flipped it over and asked this question: how do artists try to change society? And basically, what they were supposed to do is put together either a performance-based presentation or a visual poster kind of thing, and they could choose any kind of genres that they wanted. They could look at short stories, poetry, and the only real hardcore expectation I had was that they had to have 3 pieces of original work and 2 pieces of published work.
And they chose a certain kind of oppression to focus on, right?
And they had to choose any kind of oppression that they wanted to. And so again, even that, I mean, even as I'm going through the description of it, it's pretty, the directions were pretty clear. But we went to the library, it was wide open, they could focus on whatever they wanted, they could use whatever kinds of pieces that they wanted, and they could sort of get to the answering of that focus question relatively however they wanted. It's not totally ambiguous, but
I think that
for most of them it was pretty ambiguous, and they stressed out a little bit, and some of the kids took longer to sort of jumpstart than others. But the proof is in the pudding, and those final projects that they came in just totally blew me out of the water. The kids that I thought they weren't even going to do the project. I thought that they were going to choose to, either hand it in a week later or whatever. I have every single project came in on time, and they were so psyched. The only kids that had to perform were the ones that chose to do the presentation, and they were getting graded purely on their presentation. I wasn't looking at anything. And then I had 10 kids between the past 2 days that wanted to present their posters to the class. They weren't even getting graded on the presentation. They just wanted to read a few pieces off their poster and tell the class.
Share their work.
That's so
Yeah, and they
cool.
were psyched, and they brought it in early, and they were like, look what I did, I usually try to get feedback after a project to find out what I might change for the next year, and they actually, interestingly enough, the day that I gave out the assignment, we brainstormed different types of oppression, and we sort of came up with this little list of, you have racism, gender oppression, age oppression, and we had this list of maybe like four kinds of oppression, and no kid went to one that wasn't on that list. And interestingly enough, there were 2 kids that agreed that it needed to be more ambiguous, that putting that list up on the board, each kid felt like they had to zoom in on one of those oppressions, whereas if we didn't even brainstorm that list, then the kids would have had to come up with their own oppression that they were going to. And most of them probably would have gone for racism or gender oppression or something that's easily accessible, but they would have
Maybe
been
not,
happy
maybe
had we
someone
not
would have
even-
done
Right.
weight or...
Sure,
or-
exactly, anything that they would have found.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, that's what we did in our class for the past few weeks, and it worked out really well. And it was relatively ambiguous. And high risk. I mean, that's a major assessment. We're not going to have very major assessments this quarter, so that could wind up being 15% of their grade for the quarter. And they're all perfectly happy with that.
I want to ask about the risk factor, because to me, when things become high risk, kids respond to that in different ways. High risk to some kids means it's a large percentage of their grade. That's what most people think of.
Right.
Other kinds of high risk things are things that maybe kids who are real shy, don't like to do stuff in public, so a public presentation for some kids is really high risk. Or kids who are computer phobic, you know, that I can't do this in technology, I can't do it by myself, I have to have someone help me, or whatever it is. And it's just real interesting when we think high risk, a lot of us think, oh,
Percentage.
high percentage, but I don't
I
think that's
what the
necessarily
kids
true.
feel.
Well, that's true what a lot of kids feel, but I have observed it in other kids where, you know, it's not that bothers them, it's some other.
And that's where the ambiguity thing comes in, that for a kid that's afraid to get up in front of the class and talk to a group, you don't want to say, okay, get up in front of the class and tell us about something. You want to say, this is exactly what you need to tell us about, and make it low ambiguity so that, you know, they can.
Yeah.
I'm just wanting to take time for a second and find out where people want to go with the discussion, or if we want to, the idea after the discussion was just to take some time to do a reflection individually, whether that's for you writing or just thinking, maybe for about 10 minutes, take a break, and then come back. And I guess the question I was thinking about, but we could add questions to it if other people have ideas, is what are the implications based from just listening to their shadowing experiences, and then thinking about our discussion. So one question I just wrote down on the agenda was, well, so what are the implications maybe for us individually as teachers in our classes, for us as a CFG, what we've done, where we want to go, and then I guess the next level would be what are the implications for school, especially on some structure topics that we talked about. But people might also want to spend a couple more minutes talking, or people might want to throw out more questions for people to think about for reflection.
Just along, and you kind of hit on this, but as we were talking, especially as Eve was talking about her class, I thought it would be interesting to hear where people in their own classes have seen engagement or ambiguity, either or both. And I don't know if we want to talk about that, but I'd be interested in hearing that.
I'd be interested in hearing, you know, Eve's idea that it seemed really easy, I found interesting. I think my Spanish 2 classes, for example, I think it's pretty damn easy, but I have very few high grades and very low high failure rate. And I'd be interested to hear how some of the other teachers feel about the difficulty of their classes. Just if anyone would like to share that, to give us an idea, how easy is it to be a student at CFH for the average kid?
A lot of people with GPAs over 4.
Well, I mean, in my case, I would say in Spanish 2, you could probably get an A by just mentally attending 75% of the time and doing, you know, an hour a week of home or study, something like that would, for the average kid, be easy to get an A. You know, is that easy in other classes? I know in my Spanish 5, it's not quite that easy. I hope, but
You know, Andy, I just, last week, was it? I gave a little quiz kind of thing, again, 25-point quiz. And the quiz was based literally on 4 days of in-class time. And it was absolutely, if you had been alive in my classroom, and if you had been in any way awake and paying attention, and it was 4, I have to say, very interesting days. I mean, I played teacher as entertainer for those 4 days. And I was all over the room, I was crazy. They had this map in front of them, I told great stories. It was like 4 days of fun for them to sit down, and they were all into it, it seemed. This quiz I gave, which was like based directly on those 4 days. No homework, didn't have to do anything at home, not very many A's. Matter of fact, like 2 A's.
In
Some
an
B's,
intensive
lots of C's, not intensive.
You're just talking about your 7th period?
Uh-huh,
Oh, okay.
yeah, standard class.
7th period, they're sleeping. They're ready to go.
7th period.
I mean, I'd be curious though, standard?
I didn't even give it because it was too easy. The quiz was way too easy to give it to the intensive class.
Right.
But
I'm just-
I gave a
7th period explain all of it.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Because
I
my
don't,
7th period is one of my best classes. Now granted, it's tiny. So it's a great group of kids to work with because it's so small. Everyone, it's a very comfortable atmosphere. We have a lot of fun and whatever. But I think if it was as big as my other classes, it would be, basically hell. But it's not. It's so small that there's such a sense of community in that classroom that things do happen. I mean, they like it. And that's a scary thing to teach math 7th period, and I'm teaching pre-calculus 7th period, and it can happen. But I think part of it is, it's
It's
a
an
small class.
exception.
Right, it's the small class, and I love teaching it then because those older kids get out of school early and all 7th, I bet you if you look at all junior, senior classes, 7th period, they're tiny.
But I know that we teach differently, but I did the same 4 days, and I did a very similar test,
Quiz,
and I'm sure my kids are probably similar to your kids, and my kids did better.
Really? That's interesting.
They didn't, not a lot of A's, but a lot of B's.
Did you expect them to, I'm just curious, because I'm struggling with this. I mean, this isn't really I guess it's answering your question about the difficulty of classes versus the rate of success, but, I mean, we have medium-sized quizzes or small tests like that in humanities, and standard class, the kids don't study. There is a handful in each group that studies, and they get the A's because they study. The kids don't study, they don't care to study. I guess if I gave them a study guide and said it was going to be graded, that it might increase the rate of success. But I'm just curious, did you expect them to do a little studying beforehand, or was it?
Oh, yeah, I told them
Quiz
at the
tomorrow,
beginning,
quiz.
we're gonna do this 4
4
days,
days.
4 things.
I expect
There's
you
gonna
to
be a
know
quiz
the
at the
stuff.
end of it, know the stuff, you need to look at your math, you need to do really well in your math, because the math will be part of it, and.
No, they even put you to as Christian.
No, I mean, no,
He was not.
It was Muslim. But anyway, and they totally didn't get it. Yeah. I mean, I'm finding the exact same thing in my ninth
And again,
grade
you know,
standard.
My caveat was that if they would engage, if they would be mentally attentive 75% of the time. And that's,
You know, it'd be really interesting to have a panel of students watch this video and stop it whenever they want and make comments. It would be
love that.
really interesting to hear what students thought of this discussion.
My opinion of school, going back to your question, Andy, is if kids just do the work, it doesn't even have to be done well. Just do the work, do the homework, do the project, turn something in, you're in a pass.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not that hard in university.
It's really easy.
Right.
Some places.
I bet science is really hard here. But that's my own bias. I think English is hard too, because I don't do well in English. But I think based on what I can see, that the history classes, you pay attention in class, do the reading, you should be able to do it.
You know,
You should be able to get a B or C.
But the whole idea of exhibitions is that you can't just,
You can't wing them.
you can't totally wing it. You need to be.
Not everybody does exhibitions.
No, I know, but thinking about most of your comments have been about World History 1, which you teach and which you observe with your student that you're shadowing. I mean, it's also interesting to think that most schools give out Ds, which is literally C time, because you just.
Nobody would be failing in our school.
Right, I mean, they have to at least turn
There
their
would be
work in.
some.
Right.
I mean, I've thought often about the kids that would be passing if we gave
Gave Ds.
60% range as passing, and I think, oh my God, how insane, they should
To
not
pass
be
that
considered.
person.
Right, and I'm glad that we don't, but.
I'm sure the students will like that comment.
Right, I mean, simply, if you show up, pay attention, do the homework in most of your classes, and the homework often
Most
is,
of the time.
10
It's not even
questions.
homework all the
Do
time.
most of it, do most of it, and turn your stuff in on time. And you don't have to do excellent on it, turn your stuff in, you could pass all of your classes.
Eve, how much
You know,
homework did
comment-
your
com-
students have?
What? I
How
just
much-
wanted to say this one quick
Uh-huh.
thing that, thinking back on the one day, there wasn't one class that said, okay, take out your homework. I need to check it. So, I mean, obviously,
Yeah, me, well.
who knows how much they get homework, but on that one day, they didn't have any homework checked. Any homework for any class due that day to check. What was the question?
How much homework did that student have for the next day? How much was assigned?
None.
And yours,
Well, let
Amy,
me
was
see.
1.
But none in science. The history, there was gonna be something due in 2 days. None in English. Spanish, there was a project they were gonna be assessed on a verbal and picture thing that they were doing in like 2 days or by the end of the week. So none, there was none. Your homework tonight is, I think math, they had they had problems to do in math, but they did them they had time at the end of class. They did them in class.
My student, let's see, history,
They-
none.
For the most part. they
Spanish,
did
there was a
them,
little
they could finish it.
worksheet. English, there was a test the next day. Science was a project due in a couple days, but it wasn't a high It wasn't a big deal for Project, I don't think. Math was a test that day, so they probably had a day off after the test, and nothing in aerobics.
It would, I know that you
So,
had,
almost nothing.
your student had 2 intensives, because it would be really interesting. We never did get to see the kid who is doing four APs or whatever, because it would be
That's a
interesting to
different
see.
day. Matter of fact, I had a kid, one of these debate kids, say to me, I am telling everyone I know in 8th grade to think thrice about taking, he used the word thrice, about taking thrice, about taking 4 intensive classes next year. I'm telling everyone, don't do it. If there's no reason to do it to yourself. He's saying that, so. that's
My
interesting.
student didn't have any intensive classes, but I have the feeling that a lot of students choose not to take intensive classes because they just want to cruise, that standard classes should be easier and that they can put a minimal amount of effort in and get A's in standard classes, and that, I'm a little worried about that. I mean, that's pretty much how I was when I was in high school. I didn't challenge myself. I was definitely smart enough to have taken any honors classes, but I figured, you know, B's are good. B's are above average. B's on the report card, they say B equals very good. And very good is fine enough for me. And that's how, and you know, now I think I wasted an awful lot of time trying to be very good instead of excellent. But, you know, to choose to take
I can just be a little, 10-year-old Eve thinking,
no need to try to achieve excellence, because very good is very good.
I mean, is one of the implications then to re-examine grading?
I think one of the implications is to re-examine how much we challenge our kids, and not to let the kids try to bully us into lowering our standards. I chose to take this standard class because I do not want to be challenged, so how dare you challenge me?
or it's an
And we,
elective.
a lot of times, give in to that.
The elective thing.
You know, it's not
People
fair.
are not about that.
But I think that's a concern, because, you know, here's a student that I followed who's perfectly capable of, you know, achieving greatness in any intensive class, and just kind of cruising through standard classes, not really being, there really shouldn't be much of a difference.
But you know what, go ahead.
At the same time, though, I have some kids in this 9th grade World History 1 7th period class who I know have signed up for World History 2 intensive or honors, whatever it's called next year, because they realize, you know what, this is not as hard as I thought it was going to be. This is actually really easy. I'm getting an A without really that much thought. I might as well go for it with the intensive and take
Might as well get
take
the
a
weight.
more get the weight, and also get a more interesting class. I mean, they've said that to me. I think I want the challenge next year.
I worry about, though, like us saying, well, now I can give you homework because I know how much you guys are doing at night, and then just getting 7 more little hoops to run up to
Right,
jump over
no,
at
that's
home,
not what we wanted
right?
to do.
And so it needs to be more. I like the whole idea of what you and Kathy were saying about this chance to reflect, this focused continuation of what happens in school, and not a hoop.
We should have AA beginning of
Rigor.
every day, and we should ask them, reflect back on one thing you learned yesterday in school. And that, nobody would show up.
Why not in your class? Why not in your class every day?
Oh, yeah, periodically,
I used to
stop,
do a
think
thing
about
with-
what, yeah.
With kids when we had tracking back in the old days. They had to come into class, I've reversed it,
We don't have that anymore.
and they had to have a ticket of admission to class every day and give them an index card. And the first thing they had to do was sit down and write something they learned the day before. Or, as they were leaving the class that day, they had to quick write down what they learned. Anything. He doesn't know math. That can work. But that they were engaged and they were thinking about it. And Reggie, your comment about your last class, you said you have a sense of community. That's obviously what we're trying to do with our school, but I think that's what's going to change the system, is we do that and we find that time every single period, in that 50-minute time, we dedicate, that there's something, check their affect, let them know where you're at, and then we have this sense of, hey, how you doing today, and there is some kind of an exchange, and then, okay, then we go to business. And we have an agreement about why we're all there and what we're all going to do.
And if we go, even just looking at the schedule proposed for next year, which is having our late start week every week, you will have an 80 or possibly even 90-minute block once a week with kids, which might afford more time for that kind of thing. Where you really can take a few minutes to do some sort of journal writing or reflection and then share, or whatever it is.
Because one of the things that I keep hearing
Yeah.
from the kids who are burning out is the brighter kids are bored because they're not challenged enough, and there's no contact. Either I can't get to the teacher, there's a line waiting to talk to you at the end of class, so, oh, well, I'm not gonna hang around. And then we talk about, well, write a note and hand it to the teacher and say, I'd like to talk to you about this tomorrow, or whenever you can. And that isolation, that human contact part. So the class doesn't become, hey, I wanna be there. They care about me, my classmates care about me, my teacher cares about me.
This is such a huge thing to me because, and I'm part-time, that when I have 150 students, I absolutely cannot, and it's almost like, it's not like, I mean, I could touch and relate to and somehow try and connect with 50, but when I have 150, I can't even do 50. It's like I can't do any, I go in overdrive. And so now I'm part-time and I have however many, 75, right, 75 that I have, and it's still too many. It's still too many. It's better, but it's still too many. And so I mean, when you get a class that has a sense of community, it's such a wonderful thing, and magic happens. It's really neat the things that happen, but it's so. I mean, that sounds geeky, but it's true.
No, I'm laughing because I have way too much community in my Japanese class, and I'm not sure what's going on, and there was magic. That's why I'm laughing.
Oh, you
You're
too.
way
You do.
too comfortable.
In that class. Oh, I think it's great. I mean, it was kind of what Mayumi said when she visited. Didn't she go through? Did you guys ever hear her comment about? This is what she.
Who's Naomi?
What's her name? Your Japanese friend.
Sumi? Oh, Sumi?
Sumi.
What'd she say?
Naomi.
Mayumi.
Am I at the end?
Umi. Really.
What'd she say?
She just said that what she was struck with about American schools was how much students laughed,
Yeah, they have a lot of fun in school.
which I thought was really neat. When
Well,
kind of
As
off
opposed to
subject.
Japan where no one laughs.
No one smiles.
They're also more comfortable, I think. I mean, I've heard, if you think about other schools where you've taught or been, there's a predominantly younger and somewhat more informal faculty overall, would you say? There's a little more rapport or comfort or obnoxiousness sometimes, but I think Sumi saw that too. I mean,
Right.
it would be different in other schools, some other schools.
Right.
Well, yeah, let's take a break and come back at 5 after and just try to write down some of the implications and then take time in our peer coaching triads and then.
Isn't it cool? My friend.
Are we gonna have a chance to discuss the implications of it right now?
Yeah.
I'm gonna write. I have to ask Joanne a question.
You should do it.